You still getting clear volume from me?
Yeah, you're fine, Paul. Okay, so here we go.
The recording has started.
My name is Dennis Speed, and on behalf of the LaRouche Political Action Committee, I want to welcome everybody here for our fireside chat with Lyndon LaRouche. This, of course, is a momentous week. This is the fourth time in American history that an impeachment against a president has been attempted. On the other hand, this one is utterly unprecedented in that it has no basis whatsoever. I guess we could say the Bill Clinton one was close, but even the Bill Clinton impeachment process pales in comparison to the absurdity of what we're confronted with right now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read to you the lead of what we call our morning briefing. Some people may not know what this process is, but I just want to indicate that since January of 1974, that is for 45 years, this organization every morning has started the day with its own source of intelligence and news. We've never been victimized as such by the institutions of fake news. We've been victimized perhaps by our own misevaluations or sloppy thinking, but we made sure to never be victimized as of January 74 by relying on other newspapers or other sources of news. And we are going to urge that all of you follow our example, as we'll discuss a little bit later in the call. So what I'm going to do is read you the beginning of tomorrow's briefing lead. This is by Barbara Boyd, and it is called "What You Are Hearing Are the Real Reasons the Warmongers Want Trump Out. They want war." So it says, on Thursday, we presented our analysis of the shameless impeachment charade, which occurred Wednesday in the House of Representatives. We emphasized that that which passed by most unnoticed as being its most significant event. Two State Department bureaucrats, George Kent and William A. Taylor, inculcated with the British imperial view of the world, defended that view as being central to the entire post-war order. And they portrayed the President of the United States as a bumbling, uninformed character who would topple that glorious order solely for personal gain. One of them, George Kent, went so far as to portray the neo-Nazi thugs used by the British and the Obama administration to conduct the 2013 to 2014 coup in Ukraine as equivalent to the Minutemen of our American Revolution, and that the U.S. aid to keep the war in Ukraine going was in the tradition of the Marquis de Lafayette and von Steuben, Baron von Steuben of Germany. Within one paragraph, George Kent was praising his old professors Zbigniew Brzezinski and Henry Kissinger as the paragons of virtue, whose 21st century doppelgangers, that is to say, shadows, were the key State Department witnesses now testifying against the president. Democrats fell all over themselves in fawning praise of this legacy. Republicans were afraid to touch it. Most of the senators who will vote on the president's impeachment are up to their ears in supporting this sort of warmongering. Ukraine's viability for years to come has been ruined in a blood-soaked ethnic cleansing occurring in the Donbass in the wake of the 2014 coup conducted by neo-Nazis. Most of the thousands of people who were killed were citizens of eastern Ukraine, of Russian heritage and inclination. Yet, Adam Schiff, George Kent, and William Taylor lied outright about this, portraying the dead as brave Ukrainians fighting Russia. Our State Department calls the coup of 2014 and the ensuing war in eastern Ukraine the revolution of dignity. Kissinger and Brzezinski together are guilty of more war crimes and genocides than perhaps anybody in the 20th century, and in doing so, they created many of the axiomatic views of the world propounded enthusiastically by Kent and Taylor yesterday, to the applause of House Democrats. As Senator Rand Paul would tell you, he, like the president, is an island of one in the Senate when it comes to issues of war and peace. For those who confidently predict that impeachment will die in the Senate, have you looked at your senators' contributors lately, or the sins that can be dredged up from their past life to spring in a moment of crisis, spring up in a moment of crisis? Do you understand whom you are actually fighting? I'm going to stop there because I want to point something out to people. As is said at the end, if you are bamboozled enough to believe that there's no possible way that impeachment can in fact pass the United States House and Senate, you are sorely, sorely in need of this phone call tonight. And in addition to that, you're in need of joining the effort that we have launched, which is to create what we call the Emergency Alert System. Now, this is an adaptation of an expansion of our regular daily briefing process, but it's happening at a time that we hope that everybody here gets to understand as the call goes on. So I'm not going to take a lot of time on this except to point out the following. There's a process that happened in Bolivia where the government was overthrown. There is a process going on in Hong Kong where there's rioting and so on being done to try to destabilize a portion of China. And there's a process going on in the United States to make a coup against the sitting president. All three of those processes originate in the same location. They originate in the City of London, and they originate in British intelligence. The LaRouche Political Action Committee and Lyndon LaRouche personally have for 45 years been an island of one nearly in identifying the true cause and the true actions of current history for the past half century. The reason that LaRouche was ridiculed was precisely because LaRouche was right. And what we're dealing with right now with respect to the Trump administration, what you are seeing that is evolving is that intelligence capability is being deployed against the president in exactly the way it was deployed against Lyndon LaRouche, except that Lyndon LaRouche was not president. So Lyndon LaRouche is not in a position to be impeached. Lyndon LaRouche could only be tried, convicted, and jailed in a criminal fashion, as happened during 30 years ago, 1988, 89. But what is going on with respect to the President of the United States now is an attempt to LaRouche the President. And that, therefore, we have a kind of distinct, unique authority in terms of what's going on in the United States that no one else has. It's important to recognize not so much that that's the case. I guess we can demonstrate that, and I think we will be demonstrating that, not just tonight, but in the course of the next several months, because what we are going to do is not single-handedly, but we're going to play a pivotal, unique role, not merely to roll up this impeachment game, but to take down the agencies that are deploying on behalf of a foreign power, London, and thereby preserve the presidency. You cannot preserve this presidency, and you will not preserve this presidency unless you take down the intelligence forces of the foreign power attacking it, and that is London. And that is what distinguishes us from everything else that's going to be happening. What we're going to do now is go through and discuss with you not merely elements of the picture that's out in front that they're trying to direct everybody's attention to, but the actual forces behind the scenes, the people trying to make this coup against the presidency and the nation of the United States, and why they're trying to do it, which lies, of course, in the strategic questions, the larger strategic questions that the President of the United States has been addressing himself to, namely the relationship with Russia, China, India, and the role of the United States going forward in world history through, for example, Moon, Mars programs and space programs, et cetera. So to give us the report tonight, we have Paul Gallagher. I think people know him from EIR magazine. Probably read some of his articles, and he's very involved in the economics desk of EIR. And so Paul's going to start us off. After Paul, then we're going to go right into questions and discussion. I encourage, if some people have been involved in some organizing on this front, or some pertinent matters have come up in the course of you talking to people in the last couple of days, you raise those as questions or as comments. We'll tell you to press *6 when we get to that portion. of the evening. Okay, so Paul, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thanks, Dennis.
Great.
Well, since we want to rapidly to increase the intercommunicating size or interacting size of our movement using the alert system that we have and a lot of means associated with it, we want to do that in order to achieve immediate objectives. So let's discuss what they are. First of all, I have to remind people we are in a situation of financial crisis. It's a global crisis, relatively speaking, but I'm discussing it now in terms of the United States. We know more or less that some relatively large financial institutions, one or more, have become illiquid this fall in the way that Bear Stearns and divisions of Citigroup became illiquid in early 2007. We know this from what the Federal Reserve Bank has been forced to do since the middle of September, now 2 months ago. It has been forced first to establish daily liquidity lending to the big banks overnight on a rapidly increasing scale, which has gotten out to up to $120 billion per day in what they call overnight liquidity emergency loans. In addition, it has been forced then to add 2-week emergency liquidity loans up to $45 billion a day. That started lower also and has gone up. In addition to that, just today, it has announced an additional program of emergency liquidity loans to begin in December for 14 days or 28 days, whatever is sufficient at that time to get these obviously somewhat crippled financial institutions past December 31st, past the end of the year, end of the financial year. We know this because we've been reporting it. This is all being done essentially in secret. Even financial publications, which specialize in reporting Wall Street, financial news, and so forth, have not been reporting the way in which the Fed has been increasingly forced to do this. And of course, one has to read not only the Federal Reserve sites and so forth, one has to read the blogs, not just of financial blogs, but contrarian financial blogs to find any kind of coverage of this going on. And of course, there is an even deeper secret as to what are the actual financial institutions which are in need of this emergency liquidity every day. They are paying some of it back every night, but over this period of 2 months since mid-September, we know that the Federal Reserve has put out more or less permanently more than $300 billion in bailout cash on an emergency basis to large financial institutions, to the 25 so-called primary dealer banks. Where it's going from them is being kept a secret. Whether it is any of those banks, which are the biggest banks in Europe and the United States, which are illiquid, that is being kept a secret by the Federal Reserve in the way that it was in 2007. Although at that time, at least, there were some business journalists who made very hard-hitting efforts to find out who it was and found, for example, eventually, that $2.5 trillion in loans of this kind were made to Citibank in that period of time in order to keep it from blowing up completely. So this places us, if we were in a repeat of the 2008 crash, which we are not, and this may very well be a considerably worse one, but if we were, this would put us roughly at the point of April, May 2007 in the September 2008 global crash. It was just at that time, just before that time, that our magazine, Executive Intelligence Review, in a rather notorious headline on the front cover of a feature story, said the mortgage meltdown could cause a global crash. and in 10 pages described exactly how that was likely to happen. This was perhaps 18 months away at that time, but it was visible. It was clearly visible to Lyndon LaRouche. It was clearly visible to the intelligence people in his movement, and he then immediately moved to say what had to be done to protect the economy from that coming crash. Not to stop it. He said it couldn't be stopped, but to protect the economy from it. Now, this market in which the Federal Reserve is pumping the liquidity in is called the repurchase market or the overnight lending market. That market is not what is driving this crash or this crisis. It is the 10 years of zero and negative interest rates by the central banks. It is the now $16 trillion corporate debt bubble in the United States, which grows at $1 trillion a year and has nearly tripled since 2009. That's what's actually driving this. The derivatives figures, which have just been published by the Bank for International Settlements, are disturbing. You can see from them that more and more trillions of actual bank assets and financial hedge fund and so forth, financial assets, are at risk of suddenly being lost in the derivatives markets. And finally, the climate change green bubble, which the central banks are pushing now to force investment out of coal and oil and so forth and into solar and wind, this which they imagined might slide them through this crisis without a complete crash is actually making it worse, because it is pulling down very rapidly the market values of assets associated with the carbon, with fossil fuels in particular, and it is bringing forward, not pushing away, but bringing forward the point of this crash. So, knowing that that's happening, right now, what we must get done is to reestablish the Glass-Steagall Act in the United States. The Democratic Party has disappeared on this issue. Just one session of Congress ago, there were 90 Democrats in the House and 11 in the Senate who were sponsoring Glass-Steagall bills. Now there are virtually none because they're all totally absorbed in trying to impeach the president. This is essential now. It would give the commercial banks time to withdraw themselves from all of the speculative hedge funds, investment banks, private equity funds, derivatives markets, and so forth, and to let those things crash on their own, while the lending banks were still able to lend, so that if the United States then issues productive credit for infrastructure, for manufacturing, to get out of the crisis, that credit will go through the banking system where we want it to go, into productive employment and productivity, and will not disappear into a million speculative channels. So we have to, Glass-Steagall, as everybody knows, is one of the sine qua non laws of Lyndon LaRouche, one of what he called his 4 laws. It leads directly to the issuance of that credit and to much bigger things, including crash programs in space exploration and in fusion. We have to get that first step underway. Secondly, we have to fight for openness to cooperation on credit with China. This is one aspect of the combating the war drive that Barbara was talking about. But specifically in this case, the United States and China are in a position to very readily cooperate in joint issuance of credit for major productive projects, not only within their countries, but as China is already doing, within many third countries to which we can export capital goods, to which our manufacturing will contribute. We have a pamphlet coming out. I believe it may come out within the next day or so, which directly attacks the propaganda war against China in this country, exposes it, where it is coming from, who controls, for example, the Falun Gong group and the Epoch Times, which many of you may have suddenly seen emerging from nowhere in recent months. Who actually connects this to Steve Bannon, for example? where is the money coming from that is driving this propaganda war? But more importantly, or equally importantly, what are the immediate steps by which China, with its very large holdings of U.S. Treasury securities, could contribute those Treasury securities to a credit institution in the United States to build new infrastructure in the way that President Trump clearly wanted to do when he was a candidate, and to rebuild our manufacturing capability. And the United States, with other countries as well, could drive its space program, Project Artemis, the Moon Mars program, forward much more rapidly over the sabotage at this point of key Democrats in Congress who are holding up the budget for that. So that pamphlet is, as I said, is about to come out. Now, and the distribution, wide distribution of that and the use of elements from it also electronically, that's going to it's going to enable the president, for example, to take trade settlement steps, not in the way that they're being taken now, which is an infinite process leading to nowhere. It's like constantly approaching an asymptote which will never be reached. And there is not going to be any agreement this year. Instead, it will enable him to take trade settlement steps in a different way, in a way which actually would get credit flowing between the two countries and get great project building underway, for example, in Mexico, in Central America, with the joint investment of the United States and China. So that pamphlet is to accomplish something very specific. And on the impeachment fight, I'm not going to repeat what Barbara very, very succinctly described and powerfully described in what Dennis read to you at the beginning, nor what he added to it. Simply to indicate we want to put the mass organizing we're doing against the impeachment process on the basis of a drive against a British war game, a drive against a war game, and in this particular case, very specifically, a British intelligence war game. Why? Why are they doing it? In part because war is the resort of imperial finance when a crash, a financial crisis hits them, when their financial power appears to be disintegrating or in danger of doing so. War is the way they respond. It changes the geometry in ways that they like. It confuses the people in the countries affected by the war. It enables them to keep their balance, they think, in the face of the loss of their financial power, even temporarily. So they resort to war in these situations. But here you have something building up, in addition, for a very long time, as Barbara described. So you have a war impeachment against a peace president. And this has to be a drive against this counter to impeachment by us, has to be a drive against a British war game. No one should imagine that Adam Schiff is running this impeachment drive, or that Nancy Pelosi is running it, or that any Democrat is. Adam Schiff is like the little boy under the Christmas tree who suddenly opened a box on Christmas morning, or in this case it was in July, and found there was his great big prize CIA top secret clearance badge, and then turned around and saw coming through the door of his house, or the door of his office in this case, all the superheroes from the swamp, one after another, from the State Department, from the National Security Council, from the CIA, from the DIA, from the Pentagon, coming in and saying, Adam, we want to testify at the hearings you're going to hold. I am, says Adam. Yes, you're going to hold them. You're a smart boy. You too can be a hero in this war drive, in this drive to bring down the president. So get going. We have a whole bunch of whistleblowers here, or smoke blowers, as we might call them, from the CIA, a whole group of them, and they are ready to give you everything you want. And then we'll all be there, all of us from the swamp, in order to come in and promote war as national security. We will explain to all of the watchers of your hearings across the country that war confrontation with Russia is actually national security, that perpetual wars throughout the developing world actually constitute national security and therefore peace. We will convince them that U.S. national security depends on perpetually being in war, in regime change war, and that in fact this is the essence of peace. And if you listened or read exactly as Barbara said what these swamp creatures testified at the hearing, that's exactly what they were saying, and they were concentrating on Ukraine. This is now as the president himself said, the third stage of the drive to get him out. In this case, it is specifically aimed at a policy of getting Ukraine back at war with Russia. And you don't have to, the clearest proof of this appeared yesterday in the New York Times, an interview with a man named Igor Kolomoisky. He is acknowledged to be the political sponsor, more or less, of the new president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. Kolomoisky is one of these very rich, what they call oligarchs in Russia and in Ukraine, and he has had a very dramatic change in his view, which was previously he was previously funding and equipping his own militia to fight the Russian-speaking Ukrainians in the east. He now has an entirely different view, and in his interview he said, "Impeachment is the last straw. Now that we see you doing this, or trying to do this, we see you impeaching the president, we are going back to Russia." He said the objective of everything that is being done in this impeachment drive is, and I quote him, "war against Russia to the last Ukrainian." And he said, "We are not playing that game. We want peace with Russia. We want a good life. We want to organize a rebuilding of our country and collaborate with Russia on this. And if a Democrat comes into office," he said specifically, he said, "if I were president of Ukraine right now, I would do exactly the investigations of corruption that President Trump wants to do. And if a Democrat then became president and gave me any trouble, I'd simply tell him, we're aligning with the Russians." So this is not just a man who has changed his views. He is now the target of all of the people who are testifying in the impeachment hearings in Washington. And he named them one after another: Fiona Hill, George Kent, William Taylor. All of these have demanded that he be forced back out of Ukraine. He had to put himself in exile in Israel while Poroshenko was president there, and now he's come back. These swamp creatures, the War and Peace gang, they have all demanded that he be forced back out of Ukraine, and that any move towards an accommodation with Russia be stopped, because this does not serve the national security of the United States. Therefore, lack of war between Ukraine and Russia is peace, is war as far as these people are concerned, and war between Ukraine and Russia would be peace. According to them, it would be the national security of the United States. And they go on and go on and go on saying this, and at the same time they are moving very dramatically now against the president, the new president, Zelensky, the one who everyone saw meeting with President Trump when all this broke out. They're moving against Kolomoisky, his sponsor. They're moving to revive the control of the fascists associated with the Azov Brigade and so forth in Ukraine, and get actual war fighting with Russia going again. As Kolomoisky said, war with Russia to the last Ukrainian. This is the nature of the impeachment drive. It is aimed at televised propaganda to the American people on a mass scale, telling them, remember, American policy, American national security is perpetual war. Trump is wrong. He's crazy. He wants peace with Russia. He wants peace with China. He wants peace in Syria. He's crazy. He wants to withdraw. We need war. War is peace. War is national security. They are saying this over and over again to a completely distracted American population, thinking that they can stampede them. Really, I just wanted to bring up, there is one example in American history that strikes me very strongly in which something exactly like this was done. And that was in the 15 to 17, 18 years before the Civil War in the United States, when the Congress came under the control, not majority, but effective control of the slaveholding power from the Deep South states. And they repeated on the floor of the Congress over and over and over for 15 years that slavery is freedom. Slavery is equality. Slavery is the only system in which there can be freedom and equality. Therefore, they said, slavery is the expression of the Declaration of Independence of the United States. And they said this continuously for 15 years, and the newspapers all quoted them saying this, and you had president after president in that period. Perhaps the best example, the little known, little remembered, for good reason, Millard Fillmore, who was a president from Buffalo, New York. He was an anti-slavery Whig from Buffalo, New York, who was president for 3 years. And during his presidency, the power of the slave power in the United States dramatically expanded and grew more powerful, including by actions that he himself took. And his entire cabinet was dominated by slaveholders from the Deep South. That happened with president after president until suddenly in 1858, 1859, the Republican Party was very rapidly organized, apparently out of just a few shards of other parties, but was rapidly organized in order to completely change the policy of the United States, to reassert the Declaration of Independence, to reassert the American system of internal improvements, infrastructure building, national banking, after 15 years in which everyone had been forced to listen to the idea that war was peace, that slavery was freedom, slavery was equality. That's what you're hearing emanating from these so-called impeachment hearings in Washington. Now, we have to very rapidly organize a larger and more interconnected movement, which brings people along in whatever way possible to the idea that, to the truth that this is a war game. This impeachment is a war game, a British war game, and it will break out in war probably between Ukraine and Russia again, unless we stop it. So those are some, I think, immediate objectives that we have on our plate, and we can discuss them and also discuss from on the scene how some of the organizing in order to do this is going.
This session is no longer being recorded. The recording has started.
Sorry about that.
Q&A session has started. To ask your question, please press *6.
We will press *6 to get in the queue for any questions or comments. But we want to say to people that we want to encourage you to be part of and to subscribe to our emergency alert service. This is not only the daily briefing process, and it is certainly not only the messages that we're beginning to send out concerning the impeachment, but it's the broader capability that we want to enact. Now, this is going to be connected to our committees of correspondence. It's a very important thing that we just understand how this is supposed to happen. And again, we'll be talking about a little bit more of this as we do more questions and answers. But what I want to say to you about this is that we're very concerned to make sure that that everybody is able to participate in that. Let me just check something. Somebody just tried to call me. I don't know if that's I'm able to be heard. Paul, you able to hear me?
You're
clearly?
able to be heard.
Okay, very good.
Yes.
Because we have quite people. I think it's probably people are just trying to reach me for the questions. That's what's actually happening. So they're sort of coming in a lot. I'm going to go to one question right now, and then we'll speak as we go along about some of the things that people can do. Let's go to our first questioner. Okay, are you able to hear us? Hello?
Hi, yes, this is Randy in Washington. Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, you mentioned the Glass-Steagall Act, and I know this is a big part of Lyndon LaRouche's plan, one of his 4 laws. Could I ask who in the Lyndon LaRouche group is spearheading to working to reinstall the Glass-Steagall Act? Specifically, who in Congress are you actually working with to promote this whole idea, which is I totally agree with. So that's my question.
I know that Paul's going to answer this. Excuse me. I know Paul's going to answer this, but there's one thing I want to say about this right now on this call very specifically. We do not separate Glass-Steagall from the 4 laws. It's all one idea, one thing. It's not first this and then that. I'm just saying this because it's going to be important to sort of the whole idea. We are not campaigning at this point about legislation in the Congress of the United States. This is a Congress which does not exist except as an intelligence coup against the President of the United States. And you can no longer actually get any legislation through this Congress. Nothing can happen if this process is not ended now. You cannot do it. So I just wanted to first of all, just say this, because we must understand what the circumstances are that we have entered as of 48 hours ago. Whatever existed before that, we are in something completely different now. I know Paul will have a response to this, but I just wanted to urge, and I'm saying this really for everybody else as well, that we understand what it is we're now involved in. Okay, unless you were around in 1974, for anybody else that's here, you were not involved in the process we're involved in now. Even the Clinton impeachment was in no way like what you're actually faced with now. So, sorry, Paul, if you had something you wanted to say to that. I just wanted to put that in.
Well, this is true. This is, I brought it up because it's important that we keep the American people apprised and keep organizing around this economic recovery or survival of the nation with LaRouche's 4 laws, but that we have to smash this war drive, this impeachment drive, in order to do it. The Glass-Steagall is a perfect illustration of that. There are now 30 sponsors. The consistent primary sponsor over and over again has been Marcy Kaptur of Ohio. She had a co-sponsor, a Republican from North Carolina, who unfortunately has passed away. She had 90 co-sponsors, and in effect that meant the progressive wing of the Democratic Party was pushing Glass-Steagall in the House. It is no more, because it is not doing anything but pushing impeachment and presidential candidates who are running on impeachment. So there was also great talk about infrastructure legislation coming from the Democrats. $2 trillion was thrown around. They never introduced a single piece of legislation. They have forgotten about it at this point because all things have been thrown aside that are productive in order to conduct this war propaganda drive. So that's simply to say what Dennis said. This must be stopped in order for these 4 laws of LaRouche to be implemented or even begin to be implemented.
Okay, very good. We'll go to the next question. Okay, are you able to hear us?
I am. Hi, Dennis, and hi, Paul. This is Mike Stetler in Christmas Valley, Oregon. Found the article that was mentioned by Paul during the New York Times. Could you mention the officials, the Ukrainian officials' name and position and title, and just maybe a little bit more detail on that? Because that was like a wow. That's my question.
His name, he's not a Ukrainian government official. He's a very wealthy businessman who was the sponsor politically of the current president. His name is Igor Kolomoiski, or Y, Kolomoisky. And he has changed his view entirely over a period of 5 years, from being an organizer of the war in the East against the Russians, as he called it, to the sentiments that I reported before that he told the somewhat discombobulated New York Times in this long interview, which was published yesterday. He is a target because of his association with the current president. He's a target of the war party in Britain and the U.S. who want him out of Ukraine and want Zelensky out of the presidency before peace might break out. And he made it clear in the interview that the very people testifying in the impeachment hearings against Trump are people who are trying to force him back out of Ukraine and bring down his protege, you might say, President Zelensky.
Well, thank you for that. Could you please just spell that? You spelled the name. Could you do that one more time for me?
Sure. Kolomoisky. Kolomoisky.
S-K-Y. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. We'll go to the next question. Okay, are you able to hear us?
Hello, good evening. My name is Lindy Barrera from Brooklyn, New York. Hello to Renee Segerson and the New York Lyndon LaRouche people. My question is, and thank you for this, do the elected and appointed officials of Ukraine and Russia know that the people in London, as you refer to the city of London, want them to go to war?
Absolutely. They know what the city of London is up to. Remember, the city of London is the originating source of what were for a while really crippling financial sanctions against the Russian banking system. The city of London has had Russians with money trying to invest there for decades and decades and decades, and has brought them in, reeled them in order to turn them into assets against the Putin government there. And it is very, very clearly known to Putin's government, and I think by now also to the Ukrainian government, that their strings are being pulled from London, also by the IMF. The IMF is also, the International Monetary Fund is also now, as Kolomoisky said in the interview, is also now trying to force him out and trying to basically seize his fortune. So the IMF is also placing conditions, quid pro quo, if you will, placing conditions on maintaining aid and any further tranches of lending aid to Ukraine on Zelensky having no contact with Kolomoisky and on other aspects of what the British intelligence and the U.S. intelligence are demanding. The witnesses that spoke in the hearing on Wednesday, the impeachment hearing, were specific about Kolomoisky, and they said, we want the president, I'm paraphrasing because there were several of them, they all said essentially the same thing. We want the president of Ukraine to know that it is a real liability of his that Igor Kolomoisky has returned to Ukraine, and that any relations he has with him are going to cause his government to fail. I think that was the exact words of Ambassador Taylor, our current acting ambassador in Kiev. So, yeah, they're aware of it. We would certainly wish that our own intelligence on what is going on within Ukraine were better. The situation definitely has changed slowly for the better since the election, since the actual installation of Zelensky as president. And in fact, Natalia Vitrenko, a long-standing friend of Lyndon and Helga LaRouche, whose political activity, who came very close to being elected president herself more than 20 years ago, and her activity came very close to being completely ended in Ukraine, her life in danger, her party completely dissolved as of 2 or 3 years ago. That has slowly begun to change and enabling her to emerge in a certain amount of public speaking. So things are changing. We should and wish we had better internal intelligence there. It's very clear that there's a drive for war, as Kolomoisky said, to the last Ukrainian with Russia.
Thank you.
Okay, very good. We'll go to the next person. Again, press *6 to get in the queue. I realize that several people got on after I had made that announcement at the beginning. So if you have a question or comment, press *6 to get in the queue. Okay, are you able to hear us?
Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. This is Carol from Los Angeles. Well, the only comment I have to make is that, yeah, what you said earlier was true. You're truly dealing with a horrible entity. You're dealing with Satan, and I don't mean the religious type that people, some dude running around in a weird costume with a pitchfork and horns. You're dealing with a true evil, pure in its purest form, is what you are dealing with. And I mean, if people take that lightly, they are truly idiots. They are truly fools, because this crap operates all the time, has done so for a long, long time. And, if all you have to do is look and see exactly what's been happening in this country, it's caused by them. And I mean, to me, anybody that cannot face that has truly taken leave of their senses. So yes, you are truly dealing with pure evil, and that is satanic by nature. So no, we cannot take that lightly. I agree 100% with what you said earlier. Thank you.
Okay.
I would also say, keep in mind that President Trump is a political fighter, and he kicks hard also.
Okay.
We may agree with his policies, his foreign policies, and his desire for peace in many situations. We may disagree with other things that he does, but he's no Millard Fillmore, to take my earlier example. This is a guy who kicks himself, and he has begun, and this is another thing that drove them to this Ukraine stage of the impeachment, is that he had begun his own investigations into Ukraine and into the way Ukraine was used as a weapon against his presidential campaign during 2016. So that is what put a particular fury to these swamp creatures who are coming out now, is they were looking into the way in which they were sabotaging his campaign in 2016 through Ukraine. That definitely includes Joe Biden. Trump began to investigate Biden not as a 2020 presidential candidate or opponent of his, but as the 2016 vice president who ran U.S. policy in Ukraine and virtually ran Ukraine. And one of the things that Joe was doing was moving to stop the access of Russian natural gas supplies to Europe so as to cut off that area of income for Russia. And in order to do that, they wanted to use this Burisma natural gas and oil energy company. So that company became a focus of the fight, and he put his son in there and his son's partners and so forth in that process. So what Trump was going after was not at all a political opponent of 2020, but Barack Obama's vice president and Ukraine enforcer of 2016. Trump is going to continue to kick on that.
Yeah, well, what I'm talking about is and that's all true. What I'm saying is, when Dennis said earlier not to take it lightly, I mean citizens. They shouldn't take this lightly. They should not at all, because you are dealing with evil. And I think, frankly, their instincts, although they're in denial or running away or whatever they're doing, their instincts are telling them the truth, basically. and it is hoped that at this point in time, enough of a fire will be lit under their tails to jump up and do something. They had better, or this country will not be livable. Believe me, it will not be.
I'll make a comment about this after the next question. We take the next question, but there is some relevance to actually respond to what you said, Carol. I'll do that after we take the next person. Okay, hi. Are you able to hear us?
Yeah, hello? Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, hi, Lincoln from New York. I found it interesting that somebody like Bernie Sanders, and I don't know if you paid attention to one of the last debates, how he lambasted the present leader of Venezuela, who's trying to carry out the Chavez's work for the good of the abject poor. But it's interesting that he, who is poising himself as one who's a man of the people, would be attacking someone like that. And it's also interesting that people like him and almost all of the people in the Democrats and the Republicans too have yet to repudiate Obama and Hillary for that dastardly act against Libya, which is one of the most successful African states. And as much as I am aware that they're using this by right, they should actually be looking at what the can of worms Trump opened when he started the investigation. Like, for example, the $1.5 billion that was given to Joe Biden's son after his 10 days after his visit to China. I mean, that was unheard of. $1.5 billion was given to him. What was he doing? Is he really a spy against the USA? But I also want to say that it's a very, very complicated issue. And we should not excuse them, because even Trump himself, even though I don't attack him the way other people do, I really just critique him. It's sad that he was also playing into trying to overthrow Maduro of Venezuela. It is sad, and it's also sad that he made statements such as, we should have kept the oil, like the oil in Syria, etc. So I think that in a strange way, it's devils fighting devils, and it is sad. And we in America are in denial about the wickedness of this country, and we are happy once we are living good. I mean, look at over 100,000 people were killed by the lies of Condoleezza, Bush, and Cheney. And yet they're claiming that Trump is worse than any of these people. And Bush, Cheney, and all of them are walking around writing books, etc., and nobody's taking them to task. Hillary Clinton came on TV and bragged about the murder of Gaddafi. And Bernie Sanders threw his support behind a woman like that. Don't we see that?
Yeah, but the American people took her to task. Dennis, you had something you wanted to say about this.
Well, yeah, this is of use because it gets at some things that we may be able to nicely respond to. The LaRouche organization in 1974 shaped and developed what was called Executive Intelligence Review. From that time, we were outliers in what was called the American left, and ultimately outliers in all of American politics. And there was a reason for this. What you're describing in part is what is well known, or would have been well known, let's say 30 years ago, as the right-wing social democracy. So very, very simple, very directly. And Bernie Sanders, you have to remember, is his brother is British Labour Party. He lives in England, and he is in particularly, actually British Green Party, excuse me. And he's a very important person there in that nation. Much of the Sanders, the reason that people can't quite wrap their head around Bernie Sanders is is because a lot of this is shaped by British socialism. British socialism and the British Labour Party, one has to remember, was the core of anti-communism and anti-socialism and also anti-Russian incentive after the Second World War. That was Ernest Bevin, I believe was his name, former Secretary of Labor, who was, in the words of Winston Churchill, the most important foreign secretary in British history, because he even outdid Palmerston and Castlereagh in his virulent attacks on the then Soviet Union and Russia more generally. It was he who shaped the policy that gave birth to NATO. It was NATO, but he shepherded this. He didn't create it by himself. Now, I'm saying this because the reason people don't get us when we talk about British is because they never studied actually what occurred, particularly with respect to Churchill's role after Roosevelt's death. We have no time to go through a lot of that tonight, but Franklin Roosevelt intended to end the British Empire. Winston Churchill made it very clear it will be ended, it will be preserved over your dead body, Franklin. Okay? And that's what happened. Roosevelt died, and Churchill, and others, worked to maintain the British Empire in the aftermath of his death. They were essentially successful in that up to the point of the space process between 1957 and 63. Kennedy, of course, did challenge them. Kennedy was assassinated. Where we are tonight, where we stand in this country right now, in terms of what we have to do, is that we, our organization that is, because of the way that Lyndon LaRouche led it, we were able to break through and recognize what you can call a nationalist, you could call it patriotic, or you could call it American system faction. This is not, and is not something that the intelligence services generally represent. When you talk about Kissinger and Brzezinski, when you hear somebody getting in the hearings like Kent or Taylor indifferently, these people are the face of what people keep calling the deep state. You know, we object to this term. We keep calling it the shallow British Empire, not the deep state, because our point is you can just look and see who they are. This is not a difficult thing. And if you actually begin to analyze this for what it is, it's very straightforward as to how to deal with it. When we say City of London, just so we go back to what Carol brought up, and you, sir, also brought it up, in terms of this so-called satanic element, one has to remember that when Ben Franklin was a young man, at the age of 16, 17, he came to London, and he was part of a sort of a network, a spy network, which was infiltrating the Hellfire Club, which is not an important thing to bring up except from the standpoint of this issue of the satanic element. Yes, there is a satanic element, and it's not necessarily from the standpoint of myth. Well, why? What does this mean? It refers to the notion of the use of what's called temporal power, or what in the Plato's Republic is represented by the character Thrasymachus, that might makes right. And that the idea is that material power rules, but it rules from behind the scenes. Here's what we're doing. Here's what tonight's call is about. And here's what this idea of the Emergency Alert Service is about. We are capable, because of the years that we put in, the decades, 4.5 decades we put in, we know how to give the American people, if you will, a very explosive picture of reality. It's not a question that everything we say you have to agree with. Because frankly, if you do, well, you're probably not a very thoughtful person, because you got to actually see why are we drawing the conclusions we draw. So what is important here is, if you want to understand the problem of South America, look at what happened with Bolivia. In Bolivia, the difference between Evo Morales and Maduro, Chavez, or anyone else, even for that matter, Fidel or others, was that the Evo Morales regime directly organized itself to base itself on the most advanced physical technologies, nuclear power, and also thermonuclear fusion power. There's an article that you can get from us that was written in August, which tells this story. because what they said, as was said by their vice president, that we may be poor, but we're very smart. And they negotiated a set of deals with the Russians in particular, and also with the Chinese, and they opposed the non-governmental organizations. You know, all those guys are always talking about your little brown brothers, you know, and they're going to help you out at the UN. They're going to give you an award because you built a well by stamping on the ground until the ground got wet, and then you put a stick in it, and, you know, you got water. You know, that kind of stuff they love. Appropriate technology, as they say, appropriate for you because you have nothing. So what happened was Bolivia completely opposed all this, and they went for the most advanced technology capability available. That's different. And the issue involved is that the attack on Bolivia, and that includes, in fact, even the President Trump signing on to it, that attack on Bolivia is an attack on the very essentials of the Belt and Road Initiative of China, the advanced space technology programs that Trump himself is putting forward, and it is also an attack on the central solution, which we want to see between Russia, China, India, and the United States, including implemented in South America. So I want to take the time to just respond to say this to everybody. We're asking that you help us recruit. You only need a couple thousand people who are actually in touch with us, have our alert systems, and begin to then reproduce by spinning it out and getting it to everybody, blogging with it, getting to other platforms, getting it out to your Facebook list, and so on. You only need a couple thousand people to reach even tens of millions in the United States. If those people don't just think this is, quote, information, but that this is a way to create an explosion. That is what we are trying to do here tonight. That's what we're trying to insist on. These people are completely defeatable because they're totally exposed right now. But we must seize the time. We have to do it right now. We are not going to get this moment again. So it's a great opportunity for us, and I just wanted people to understand that that's really where we are. Paul, I don't know if you want to say anything, because we have several other questions, and I can continue.
Fine. Let's go ahead.
Great, very good. Thank you for your remarks, sir. I'm very happy that you brought these things up. Yes, hello. Go ahead.
Oh, hi. This is Darwin in New York.
Okay.
Yes, and hello. How are you? My question is that it is true for the past decades there has been a long process of economic disintegration that has most definitely reached its dramatic phase with our current impeachment. And one of the things that you were talking about earlier in the call was the liquidity process of the banks, actually the Federal Reserve lending to the banks. And on August 15th of 1971 was when Richard Nixon actually took us off the Bretton Woods system, the golden standard. And at that time of being taken off the Bretton Woods system, one of the biggest things that was going on in Europe was that they were pooling their money together because they were concerned about the liquidity process. And that was my biggest question is, with our current government actually in the liquidity process, how would that have an immediate effect on us, even during this coup process and the phase of being impeached? And we also, I want to add to that question is, with that process of the liquidity, and how would the current space driver program actually help that and the credit? So that was my major question, is the liquidity of our current government. How would that affect us immediately?
Well, what I would come back and ask you to do is to go a little bit deeper. You obviously know there was a turning point in 1971 when the Bretton Woods system ended. if you go a little deeper, it was ended by the British, by the City of London. There have been very belatedly some very good books that have come out recently which have described that process in detail. For example, there's a film called The Spider's Web, London's Second Empire, which was made by a certain group. They're actually British. They've exposed a lot of this in detail, but we knew it at the time. LaRouche knew it at the time. That is that it was...
Excuse me, Paul. Let me just... Could the caller please mute, because we're getting a lot of background noise, just so we can hear the calls.
Yeah. Sorry, I apologize. Yeah, I'm kind of in a loud place, and they're very.
But if you're on mute, it'll be okay.
Hold on a minute.
I'll actually handle it. I'll handle it. Don't worry about it. Go ahead.
Okay.
Okay, Paul, go ahead.
But LaRouche understood at the time that what had happened was a totally fundamental breakdown of the prospect of future economic growth. And in fact, the prospect that came out of the destruction of Bretton Woods in August of 71, LaRouche said immediately, in August of 71, he having forecasted several years before, and the only one who had, he said immediately, this could lead through extreme austerity to fascism. It can lead to depression, economic depression, and to fascism. And he understood that the British in the City of London had seized the dollar. In effect, they had gotten control of the creation of dollars by luring American banks with illegally high interest rates which violated the Bretton Woods agreements, luring American banks to pour a lot of their capital into London, into what became the Eurodollar market, and then the petrodollar market. And through that process, they got control of creating the American currency, so that by 1980 or so, 80% of all the dollars that were circulating in the world had been created in the City of London, all the U.S. dollars. It had become the London dollar. And that meant that there would be a process of unbridled speculation with this apparently unlimited ability to create dollars and throw them into these Eurodollar, petrodollar, and other markets, offshore markets where there were no regulations, islands, Cayman Islands, and so on. There would be unlimited speculation, and that speculation would inherently have an advantage over productive investment. And this was really the key, that speculation would become, and did very quickly become, significantly more profitable than investment in real production, whether it be in infrastructure, or whether it be in manufacturing, or whether it be in housing, or whether it be in building rockets for the space program. All of those things would pale in comparison to the money that could be made in currency speculation, in other forms of derivative speculation. And so it would change completely the economies of the countries most affected by it. And that's really what triggered what we much later came to call deindustrialization of the United States and of other major European economies, but particularly of the United States. LaRouche was onto that even before August of 71, as early as 1967, when he forecast the 71 breakup of Bretton Woods if policies didn't change. Even then, he said this was going to lead to the sending out, the exporting of industrial jobs and related jobs from the United States to the south of the United States, then to South America, then to the rest of the third world. And it was going to deindustrialize the United States. That's what happened. So that really is what brings us through a number of stages where crises have seemed to hit, financial blowouts and panics of various kinds since 1987 in particular have seemed to hit more and more rapidly and be more and more serious each time. In 87, in 91, in 97 with the Asian currency crisis, in 98 with the Russian GKO crisis, the Brazil debt crisis, 2001 with the dot-com crisis, and with the elimination of Glass-Steagall, then 2007, 2008, the global financial collapse, and the mass unemployment that followed that. These things have been the characteristics of that inherently speculative system. That's what you're attacking with Glass-Steagall, and it's what you're attacking with national banking. But if this is what's underneath what the liquidity problem that the Fed now has. As I said, it's not the interbank market and these emergency demands for vast amounts of liquidity, which the Fed is having to fill. It's not those that tell you where the crisis is. Those are just bleeding wounds that are breaking out that show you that certain significantly sized financial institutions are in a lot of trouble. We don't know how many. We don't know what they are, which ones they are. It appears that there's one, two, perhaps really large ones, because the amount of liquidity they seem to need is constant every single day, in the range of $75 to $105 billion in fresh liquidity every day from the Fed. But this is not what's causing the crisis. This is a whole series of crises, especially since the 1980s, each one producing deeper recessions, each one coming more quickly. And that is what the Lynn's four laws were proposed many times, but they were pulled together by him in 2014 in a single document as the emergency laws to save the nation. And he said they're not an option, they are an urgent necessity, and they remain so right now.
Okay. There's a lot more questions. I hope now. I know there was some problems with the noise background. I believe it's okay. It's been cleared up. So I just wanted to say that. Okay, great. So let's just continue. Okay, are you able to hear us?
It's not so much a question as it is. It's not so much a question as it is a statement that I am actually through marriage related to glass through the Glass-Steagall Act. I'm not sure how that matters, but I would love to be a spokesperson for you. That's really all I had to say. I mean, I have a lot more to say, but
very good.
I'll stop there for now.
Great. Okay, thanks. Okay, are you able to hear us?
Hey, this is Daniel in Charlotte, North Carolina. How are you guys doing?
Not bad.
Well,
go ahead.
Thank you.
So I've always wondered this. When I started learning about quantitative easing, I always wondered, they print up a bunch of capital, they give it to these banks, they go and buy stocks or they buy real estate to prop up the market. But I always wondered who took ownership of that stock, who took ownership of that real estate. When you buy something or sell something, you transfer ownership. So it's come to my attention recently that they're actually buying up real estate in stock, and they're hanging on to it. It becomes theirs. So J.P. Morgan and Goldman Sachs and these guys that are getting all this bailout money, they're going out and buying up housing, and then pumping the markets back up and then selling it off. And so with this elimination of Bretton Woods and getting us off the gold standard, it seems like what they're doing since 1971 is building up bubbles, collapsing markets. They have unlimited liquidity to go out and just buy up all this stuff, prop the markets back up, sell it off, and through that process, just entirely consolidating everything, whether that's resources or real estate or ownership in corporations. So I'm just trying to make sense of how this all works. And Paul, I know that you're sort of an expert on this, so I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how this process actually works and who ends up with the ownership of the things that they buy through this QE process.
Well, a tremendous amount of it winds up in the ownership of unknown parties in the offshore markets of the city of London established, the island markets and so forth. The whole essence of those offshore unregulated markets is that the trusts through which the wealthiest people come to own these things, but through which banks and hedge funds come to own these things, are completely opaque, so that you can't really tell who the beneficial ownership actually belongs to. But if you go back to the other part of the process, I wouldn't look at it from the standpoint of end ownership, but rather what should the Federal Reserve, if it were a Hamiltonian national bank, what should it be doing? Quantitative easing is the issuance of new currency. There's nothing wrong with that in itself. For example, look at the last 10 years, the issuance of new currency by the 4.5 biggest Chinese state commercial banks. The basis of the building of the 30,000 miles of high-speed rail in China in a single decade, the basis of the Belt and Road Initiative projects, all of that has been the issuance of new currency by these very large state-owned commercial banks in China on the basis of their foreign exchange reserves, their export earnings. The result of that, from the standpoint of those banks, has been on the order of $10 trillion or so of new hard physical assets, infrastructure, housing, manufacturing facilities, ports, and so forth, hard physical assets which have resulted from that process. About the same amount of quantitative easing credit has gone out, not from the Fed alone, but from the Federal Reserve and the Bank of England and the European Central Bank and the Bank of Japan combined. About the same amount has gone out from them. Well, where has it gone? Do you see any such hard physical assets resulting from it? No, you don't, because it has acted solely to provide that new liquidity, that new currency or capital into the 25 or so largest banks in the world. It's not so much a question of what has those banks then done with it. It's more a question that the Fed has issued it to them in order to build up their reserves. Great volumes of it have been turned around and deposited back at the Federal Reserve by those banks in what they call their excess reserves. This is the way the Federal Reserve was always designed to work from 1913 on. It was supposed to build up a very large amount of reserves on the part of these biggest banks that they could use to bail everybody else out in a collapse. So they don't invest it as the credit that came out of the Chinese commercial banks has been invested. Instead, they keep it liquid at the Federal Reserve, and therefore it's all the more extraordinary or surprising that all of a sudden, in spite of all this, someone among them, or two among them, or maybe three among them, don't have liquidity. And they had to come back to the Federal Reserve and say, my God, we need overnight loans, and we need them in the tens of billions of dollars. So those are two opposed processes. If the Federal Reserve were nationalized and made into a national bank so that it was pursuing the national goals of the United States, you'd have a totally different situation, because it would then be in a position to issue credit for the general welfare, for those national purposes. But it doesn't. What disqualifies it as a national bank is its policy. It's not its structure or anything like that. It's its policy. Who does it lend to, and for what purpose? Does that make it a little clearer?
Yeah, you did. And I used to view it as two opposed processes, like you just said, until I realized that through this process of issuing collateralized debt obligations, where they're issuing just any kind of loan they can, and then on that debt, packaging that as securities, through that process, it's almost like these things are joined at the hip, because they're building bubbles through the CDOs, and then at the same time, once these things pop, then they're getting credit or capital or liquidity from the Federal Reserve, and then going up and scooping all the hard physical assets up that are laying on the ground after the bubble pops, and then propping it back up and then spinning it all out again and sort of rinse and repeat. I mean, is that an accurate...
LaRouche would frequently say up to the time of his death that each one of those cycles of bailout after a collapse brought the next one on. And in each case, it brought the next one on more rapidly than the one before. So it simply has to be interrupted and stopped.
Right. Absolutely.
But as we've been saying, we need a presidency in order to do that. And the essence of this presidency in particular, Trump's tendency to seek, even with those who's been attacking the hardest, to seek negotiations, seek peaceful outcomes with those adversaries, that is driving the British intelligence and the Five Eyes of CIA crazy, and they are determined to get him out for that reason. So we have to stop that first.
Right.
Okay, we're going to go on to the next person. Thank you. We have a lot of people on. Okay, great. All right, yeah, go ahead.
Yes, hello. Yes, hello, Dennis Omar,
yes.
New York. Yes, my concern, I'll try to be brief as possible, is the concern of they use war to mask the financial problems, and I was told rather foolishly that in order to make peace, be ready for war, and I could not disagree with that more. And I've been doing a little bit of research on what Dennis said about Dwight Eisenhower and his Chance for Peace speech, where he says quite the opposite. To make peace, you have to replace war with development, or what he calls a science-based public policy. But I think I already know the answer to this. What does Trump have? It started with the removal of troops from Iraq, which is only the first step and rather incomplete move. What does Trump have to do now to put an end to all this foolishness, this constant just shooting each other, and knock it off and replace it with post-war construction and development of the Middle East in entirety? Because everybody just can't be picking with their trigger fingers. And
I would say it's not. I mean, the point is, it's what we're trying to say here is it's not what Trump has to do. I mean, I gave the examples of those poor presidents in the period before the Civil War, whose administrations had the opposite effect of what they came in wishing to do. Because of the powers that were arrayed against them, but also because of the lack of any real organized American population to support them in what they might have wanted to do. It is up to us for Trump to take the next steps. I mean, we have to turn this on its head, turn it into a revulsion against the war policy. You remember when Barack Obama was ready to start the bombardment of Syria in 2013. That turned into its opposite because there was a wave of opposition from the American population, which was so strong that it was visibly and audibly felt all over Washington. It couldn't be denied. And Obama then looked around, and Putin came in and said, "I'll give you a hand here, buddy, and get you out of this mess." And so that turned into the opposite, much to the dismay of British intelligence, the CIA, and so forth, because from that point on, the momentum of Obama's ability to confront Russia and China fell. But that was good for us, but it was bad for them, and they were sure that Hillary was going to change that situation when she got in there, and they became increasingly furious when Trump did. But that kind of reversal was done by the American people. And interestingly, it was done by the British people. If you remember, the House of Commons voted against the impending bombardment of Syria before Obama gave it up. The American people then spoke very loudly and very quickly, and he gave it up. So we're dealing obviously with a totally different president now than Obama. It's still the responsibility of the American people. That's why we want to use our intelligence service and our alert system in particular in order to very rapidly increase the number of people communicating with us and going out and organizing on the basis of those communications. We've got to do it in that way. And then he can take the next steps. He's trying to take the next steps. That's what he was doing when he started investigating what had been going on in Ukraine.
Yeah, I think we should just say a couple things here concerning both the alert service and also the whole war we're right. Because look, Trump has tried to make peace with North Korea. Syria, of course, actually has had an ending of the war. There's also, of course, the whole idea of what can be done jointly with Russia in various theaters, and China as well, like Afghanistan, for example. So we're actually in a situation where there's more actual potential progress in this area than we've seen for a very long time. However, what's missing and what can be provided is what only we can bring. And here's how it would work. We have, well, even just today, one of our squads are down in Florida, 4-man team. They were able to have about 40 people who joined our organization. Now, just to make very clear, we've been around for a while, so there are thousands of people that have been involved with us. But what we need to do right now is have all those various people essentially agree, at least for the next year period. We're looking at the arc of the electoral period, but not because it's an election. But over the course of the next year, finance, subsidize, and become part of the actual reproduction of and expansion of the alert system. In other words, how does it work? Tomorrow, for example, there will be the lead that I read. There's more to the lead than what I read. Okay, so if you got this tomorrow, let's say at 9 o'clock, and you've got 12 or 15 or 30 people that you normally would either in some fashion text message or email, you get it out to them. And you say, what do you think? Get a response. You have a back and forth. Then maybe one of those people has, as you know, they may have a blog, they may have a Facebook page, whatever. This is then passed on by them such that we are intervening on the various platforms, and something which is dissonant relative to the general narrative gets out there. As that occurs, what we are able to do is there's intelligence to be gleaned from that. It's not merely because the situation evolves as the day goes on. So something will be different as a result of testimony. After all, after Taylor and Kent got up there and sort of waxed eloquently about Kissinger and Brzezinski, many of us knew as soon as we heard that, okay, well then what these guys are is they're the representatives or expressions of our Royal Institute for International Affairs policy outlook and the policy outlook of the City of London, the financial center of London. We knew that immediately. That's crucial because that changes not in terms of who they are, but in terms of the fact that this has been said to the American people. What is everybody being presented with? The guys inside of the bowels of the renegade faction, treasonous faction of British intelligence, working with American intelligence, working with British intelligence, want to stage a war. They want to start war with Russia. They're committed to that, as Hillary Clinton spoke of the fact that she was committed to that, in effect. That's what they're trying to do. And people who understand something about NATO recognize and know there was a deal made by James Baker with Russia, with Gorbachev at the time, that NATO would not expand 1 inch east of where it was located at the time the wall came down. No such thing happened. Now we're trying to create a NATO country right on the border in the form of Ukraine. That's a provocation for war. So what we're into and what we want to understand about the alert system, what we're trying to get across to people is hours make a difference. Days make a difference. we're not just asking that you get onto the information train and you get our, quote, information, now you've got a better briefing. That's a useful thing for you. But that's not what we're trying to do. What we're doing is we don't give out information. What we're doing is we're doing something which is intelligence and which is a polemical opposition to all of the lies being told. And it provokes people to find out what's true. So even if they don't believe us, they're going to say, well, wait a minute, this could be true, and it's certainly not the other thing I'm hearing. That process of thinking, of deliberation, we make that happen in the United States, that will explode the entire impeachment fraud. So I just want to make clear to people why it is we're asking you to do this thing of get $50 a month, okay, it's $1.75 a day, about the price. It's less than the New York Post costs every day, which is $2. But more importantly, it's what it allows us to do. So I just wanted this to be clear before it gets, we're at 10:30 now, but I wanted to make sure I said that while everybody was still there and alert. We're going to continue. We're going to try to finish off the last questions if we can. Here we go. All right, are you able to hear us?
Okay, thanks. Hi, this is Jerry, Massachusetts. Dennis and Paul, I want to ask you a question about the IG report and Attorney General Barr's investigation, and if they were able to access the DNC server that they've been seeking to do that for some time, right? And if that, because that, in relation to the 2016 election, and if that would help them in their, in the investigation. I know they're going to be talking about the Visa fraud, the Visa warrants that were, committed under fraud. But if the DNC server has been accessed, then that would help them at all in stopping this coup.
If you're asking, I don't know. I don't know if Dennis does, whether they have. As far as I know, they have not. But I don't know if either of them has got access to that server. That problem.
How come they haven't been able to get it?
No. If I don't know whether they've gotten it, I certainly don't know why they haven't been able to get it. But we have given them, and the Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity have given them, in the form of Bill Benny's reports to the president directly and to his affidavit in the Stone trial. We have given them the proof of how that server was accessed, that it was actually accessed from the inside and then gotten by various channels to WikiLeaks from an insider. I think that we're in a different stage. What the Horowitz report, which hopefully will come out within the period between now and Thanksgiving, what that will do is definitely subject some richly deserving people from the intelligence services to trial and perhaps imprisonment. But we're in another stage of the attempted coup against Trump now, and I think that's what we've been trying to make clear by the discussion so far. We're in a stage now in which the American people have to understand that the stakes are not who did what to whom or whether the president survives, because they can't judge that in any crystal ball way at this point, and they shouldn't try. The stakes are war and peace, and it has to be attacked, as I said earlier, as a British war game and defeated in that way by Americans who understand, like they did when Obama was getting ready to bomb Syria in 2013, who understand that this is something to stop, and they rise up and stop it.
Yeah, there's another thing we can say here. You want to actually get to the bottom of that? Julian Assange, stop killing him. He's in London at the embassy there, right? Assange knows exactly how he got the information. So the truth of the matter is, this is what we refer to as the purloined letter problem. That you have a man being killed because he did something to expose something which was in fact true and which nobody even talks about, which is what was actually the content of the email, which is the whole point. Still not being talked about even though people know, the various things that Hillary Clinton did in the election and so on. But if you really wanted to know, then what you would do is you'd stop British from killing him. you would make some kind of arrangement for him to be safely perhaps placed in the United States, where his testimony would be taken, or done in some other way, which was amenable to him as well. That's what you
I think. Yeah, the Schiff has always wanted to protect his whistleblower.
Yeah,
right?
but that's not. But forget what Schiff wants to do or doesn't.
Yeah, I know.
Think about it for a minute. It's British. See, what keeps going on is that people don't want to face what this is. It's British intelligence, just like the Christopher Steele thing was that, et cetera. You see, that's how the mind works. So the mind is supposed to be bamboozled and to go into some other track, rather than just looking at what you're really dealing with. So I would just say that about it.
Right.
I want to just say we're at 10:35. Thanks a lot for that. I'm going to just let you go. We're at 10:35, Paul. I've got a few things which we definitely need to still answer. Here's something which was got as a text message, and here is what it was. Can you comment on reports that since July, the Chinese have been net sellers of U.S. treasuries? In other words, China has ceased to fund the U.S. deficit, that the banks have been forced to eat these treasuries, and they are choking on them, which stops up their liquidity. So the Fed must fund this deficit through pumping money into the banks or face the freeze up of the repo markets. Wouldn't that mean that is that the case, or comment on that? So that's the issue.
Well, China hasn't increased its treasury holdings over the recent months. It hasn't decreased them either by any significant amount. It's still in the range of 1.15 trillion, as it has been, about the same amount that Japan has. It has not been absorbing those treasury securities. There has been a lot of issuance of them because there's been a large budget deficit, and there also was a period when the U.S. couldn't borrow because of the debt ceiling imbroglio. So there has been a large issuance of them, and there has been some holdup in the banks in terms of buying them themselves. That was given as the reason why the liquidity shortage emerged in the middle of September. That argument or analysis has really fallen by the wayside necessarily by the fact that the liquidity problem has gotten worse and worse and worse, even though the outstanding issuance of treasuries to be bought has varied considerably since that time, and is considerably lower now than it was in mid-September. Nothing has changed except in the opposite direction. The demand for emergency liquidity has been more and more and more until it has leveled off at a level of, as I said earlier, roughly 75 billion up to 115 billion each day, depending on whether they're doing one operation or two. And the very constancy of it suggests that it's not the banking system as a whole that just needs liquidity to buy treasuries. It is one or several big institutions or a certain group of medium-sized, say, large hedge funds, which would be medium-sized financial institutions, which are illiquid and which are going back to the well every single day because the amounts are extraordinarily stable now for the last 2.5 weeks, virtually the same thing every day. It clearly no longer is a problem of the need to buy treasuries. It's a problem of the illiquidity of some institutions, which is being hidden and kept secret. It certainly does not result from any sell-off by the Chinese, who continue to maintain their holdings of treasuries at a constant level, essentially.
Okay. Are you able to hear us?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Hi, Ed in Delaware. I just wanted to ask you to address the international strategic shift going on, where Germany is moving towards Russia, and along with Ukraine, perhaps, and the opening up of the Nord Stream gas pipelines is going through into Europe from Russia. China has these gas pipelines that are being built that are connecting it with Russia. So you've got a whole lot of infrastructure being put into place for people who believe in having a future. Now, and of course, what's happening here, we have this oil situation where U.S. became the biggest oil exporter, but that's going to collapse because it's all based upon shale oil, which is a one-time shot in the bucket. So I think that the shift in the energy supplies of the planet is also happening because of the weakening of the British Empire's financial control. And I wonder if you could address that, because they're desperate, and what we're doing is we're not the ones that are desperate. They're the ones that are desperate. I just want to know if you think that's the right approach to this, to thinking about it.
We've already been talking about it. It's definitely the case that they are desperate, and this relates to their war policy. They do have a system which is, again, cruising into a blowout in a somewhat predictable overall period of time, and they don't have any means of stopping that from happening, except by really changing relationships in the world through war and creating crises through wars and coups. So you're certainly right about that. As to Germany, Germany has desperate problems because of the grip of climate change, environmental extremism on that country's policies, which again traces back to the Bank of England, its head, Mark Carney, the actions of the central banks and other major private banks working with that combination to force disinvestment from oil and coal, and particularly coal very rapidly. Germany being a power based in part on that, is the industrial section of Germany. The businessmen in industry are in a desperate situation as a result of that, and they have long since turned to Russia and are demanding that sanctions on Russia be removed, and that that also Germany join in and cooperate with the Belt and Road Initiative. But so far, neither of those things have happened. But that's the way in which the whole German industrial sector is going and wants to go.
Good evening. Hi, Paul. Patrick from Connecticut. And this is very, very short. Anyway, a comment that I heard from Republican Senator John Kennedy. Quote, I think from the very beginning, the Speaker's intention was to give the President a fair and partial firing squad.
It's kind of I don't know how I'd rate that, kind of an attempt at bad humor. Okay. The senator from Louisiana.
Yeah.
He won't win any joke contest, I think, with that one.
Well, that's what he said.
It's not, as I was trying to say before, this is not being run by Nancy Pelosi or Adam Schiff. This is Five Eyes intelligence came to them and said, now we're going to really get this guy. You're going to have impeachment hearings. George Soros and his foundations have been training young State Department diplomats for decades. He is one of the most anti-Russian public figures in the world. He has a great deal of influence there. It's something we haven't really discussed so far. but it's one of a number of British factors which drove this third phase of the coup and most serious phase of the coup, because now it is literally the intelligence communities of Britain, the United States, Australia, and so forth, in their own name, in their own interests, saying we want to bring this guy down. As one of the journalists, honest journalists, said yesterday, the CIA is now carrying out a coup on American soil in the way that so many people have feared might someday happen, against the Constitution, against the charter of the CIA. It's not just operating on American soil, it's carrying out a coup on American soil. And that's those intelligence services centered in London. That's the level on which this third and most intense phase of the coup is being run. It has almost, you could say, nothing to do with Nancy Pelosi or Adam Schiff. The only reason she's got Adam Schiff doing it is because she thought Gerald Nadler on the Judiciary Committee was doing a terrible job. So she shifted it over to Shifty Schiff. But she herself was arm-twisted by billionaires into dropping her own previous position that an impeachment only could be attempted if there were bipartisan support for it, including in the public and including in the Congress. She completely changed her mind, and her mind was changed for her. So this is just not something that those people are doing.
Okay. Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, I'm talking to the people, in my chapter, and it's all about, the people understanding what the problem is, and it's exactly what you said. That's what I'm conveying to them. Like, get on our website and listen to the call and stuff like that. So,
you're infinitely better at it than Senator Kennedy of Louisiana.
Yeah, I'm very slow. I have a 7-second delay, and sometimes things go over my head. But anyway, I apologize if
it's fine.
I didn't realize.
We have limited time. So, bye. Okay, are you able to hear us?
This is Fred from Louisiana. Can you give me an update? How you doing? Can you give me an update on the Roger Stone case?
Dennis, can you?
No, I actually don't know exactly what's happening there. I just can't.
No, me neither.
Unfortunately, Fred, we don't. I just don't have it. Don't know what the latest is.
Thank you.
Okay, we try to get it, but we don't really know. Okay. Okay, are you able to hear us?
No question.
Hello?
Pass.
Okay, fine. Seems like there's nothing there. So fine. So I think that let me see. We're actually pretty much up on time. Let me see if I can get one last person in here. Yes. Can you hear us?
Yeah, quickly. I just wanted to jump back in because of a previous caller, just to in reference to the Clinton email and Julius Assange. Do you remember that Seth Rich, who actually is the leaker of it, was actually assassinated in Washington, D.C. He was shot in the head, and there was no money taken from him. His watch, everything was intact. And he was the one who they thought, he was in the DNC, and he was the one they thought leaked the information. And just like everyone who's about to expose the Clintons, they always end up dead under some mysterious circumstance.
Let me say something about this, okay? Because the various people, Seymour Hersh in particular, did extensive discussion and investigation of this thing around the Seth Rich business. We have stayed away from any such assertion. The reason we're staying away from that assertion is that there are other elements of that investigation that were much more easily determined but which have not yet come out. Now, what's relevant here, though, however, is the following. Assange knows who gave him whatever it was. That's my whole point. So you see, so that asserting anything about anything is completely unnecessary. But what's relevant also about the Assange case is that WikiLeaks was not an agent of the Russians, as Donald Trump is not an agent of the Russians. Now, Donald Trump is not Julian Assange. They would seem to have very little in common. And the entire one of the reasons that this is a relevant issue is this left, right, Republican, Democratic, etc., liberal, conservative. This stuff doesn't mean anything. The whole way the people have been trained to think about what is going on in this instance is irrelevant to what's actually happening. What's happening here is that the presidency of the United States and the respective party system as it has existed are all being disintegrated by British intelligence. All of it.
Yes, but understanding the Sethridge thing will also clarify a lot of things for people, because that would also clarify for people that Russia has nothing to do with it.
It is not true. It is not true that nothing was taken from Rich. See, we Seymour Hersh, I'm going through this because in this particular case, we happen to know directly from Seymour Hersh. So, because he was interested in whether or not he could prove such things. And what his point is, and what my point is to you, is that it's not that simple you can't just assert that. The way that people have been continually and traditionally buffaloed is to take that kind of a position. For example, like Gary Webb saying the CIA put crack cocaine in Los Angeles. He could not prove that. He was correct that agents who were either formerly with the CIA or were also seconded through CIA to a portion of the Bush vice presidency under what was called the Crisis Pre-Planning Group of the Special Situation Group of the vice presidency. Yeah, those people were doing that. But if you said, as he did, the CIA actually, Gary didn't say that. What actually happened was Gary put a story out, and then people in the black community and other places started saying the CIA put crack cocaine in LA. It put him in a position where he could not actually demonstrate that. And what happened, of course, is, Gary was found dead, having shot himself, supposedly committed suicide by shooting himself in the head with a shotgun or something twice. Okay, so why we know that the agencies have been involved. Coming back to why we're trying on this call to make something very clear about the emergency alert service idea, emergency alert system, is what you do in a situation where you do not have positive identification of something is you don't bother trying to prove that. What you do is you look at, who is benefiting, and further, if you like, for example, look at this thing with the impeachment. There are assertions being made, but what is the real assertion around Donald Trump on Ukraine? That he didn't want to finance a war. And that he thought, and he has said, he intends to end the wars. As he said on October 9th, when he talked about the problem of the military-industrial complex and how they loved war and how it made them a lot of money, but that he was opposed to it. Some of us who noted it at the time that he said it made the point that, he's going to war with the entire core of the people that from the time of the assassination of Kennedy have run American foreign policy. Nancy Pelosi also said that the issue was Article 2 of the Constitution, whether or not the president actually makes foreign policy, whether or not that's his prerogative. So to not makes foreign policy, but that he has the right as the executive from the executive branch to conduct foreign policy. And so what's going on is that the tenets of the Constitution are actually what's under discussion. The tenets of the Constitution are at what is actually at stake, and it isn't any of these particulars. It's this, and the American people are going to have to face that problem, and it's essentially the core of our initiative. That's what we're trying to say about the entire process. So, I mean, thank you for what you said, but that's the way that we're trying to at least engage people. It's a different level. It's not.
Thank you for that great explanation.
Yeah. Thank you. Very good. All right, so we're pretty much out of time now. We're already all the way up, so we're going to have to do a summary from you, Paul, and then we got a couple of announcements. So maybe if you have some final thoughts generally about what has been said or anything that you haven't conveyed yet.
Well, no, I mean, I don't think I have anything to add. I think that there has been some very good discussion of important things which have to do with the condition of the American people's thinking at this point and what we can do about it with our intelligence if we deploy that intelligence in the right way. We have the means by which we can get people to start acting on some fundamental questions. I mean, I would say even with regard to the last thing you were discussing, there's a certain fundamental question here that Julian Assange said the source of the emails was not a state actor. That really should settle it, because this is somebody who has not in any other case, and he's been involved in many cases, not in any other case said anything about the provenance of any of his releases, which has turned out to be false. And the content of everything that he has put out has generally turned out to be genuine and in most cases true. And certainly what he put out about Hillary Clinton was true, and how she and the DNC fixed the Democratic Convention for her. That was true. People have allowed themselves to be pushed off that question in the same way that you may allow yourself to be pushed off the question of, well, what was it that Julian Assange said? He said the source was not a state actor. That should settle it. But if you think, oh, well, I can't use Julian Assange as an authoritative source on this because look what everybody says about him, then your view of what you know is already being distorted by propaganda and by fear. So what we've been trying to discuss is more fundamental questions of whether the American people, as they've done several times, even very recently, even in the example I cited from 2013, will simply react in a relative mass way and say, no, we don't want any more wars. We don't want any more of this perpetual war doctrine. We want it stopped. President Trump is right. It should be stopped. That fundamentally is what we're aiming at here. And it does take courage of convictions on the part of people who are using our intelligence. So I would just add that as a final thought.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, Paul. I just want to say a couple things as people are going off. There are various texts and other things. People were asking different questions about how they could help and what we exactly mean by the alert system. Again, just want to make this very clear. I guess everybody that's on the phone has been organized by one of our street organizers at one time or the other, either by street or by phone. You know what we do in the street. What we need to basically do is rapidly expand the capabilities we have, but by allowing people, wherever you are in whatever your capacity is, to participate. Normally, one of the things that hangs people up is the idea, well, I can't give a presentation or I can't give the kind of discussion about these matters. I don't feel I'm fully confident. Well, our circumstance, though, your circumstance, the nation's circumstance, is that you're required to begin to do that process. And the way you do it is you call on the resources that our association can make available. Persons like Paul or others, Barbara Boyd and others, are either on these calls, and these calls happen each week. There's another call that happens on Monday as well. or we're now writing things and also doing things by means of text message and other forms. We're upgrading the entire way that we try to transmit what we know. We're even talking about some sort of text-to-voice kind of things we might be able to do that is making portions of our daily alert available as a read sort of, not quite podcast-like, but sort of like that. All of this is under discussion. What's important is that each moment or each day now, we're going to find that the situation can shift, not by the hour, but certainly over a 2, 3, 4 hour period. And we want to be able to, by means of constant updating and also reevaluation, provide not just the freshest picture, but the most polemical picture, the one that can be the most usefully provocative to point people away from the distractions. And that's what we mean by the purloined letter principle. Is once your thinking clears up so you can see, well, what's the real objective here, then there's a way to rethink everything. We want to see some reversal of some of the statements, including what the White House, for example, has said on Bolivia. But that would have to come from Donald Trump. It's not going to come from the trolls in the State Department that are really either the holdovers from the Obama administration or essentially part of the treasonous faction attacking the president in any case. Right? We're not going to get it. So that the American people being engaged and making their, through this process we've talked about, that picture known, that's the way that you'll get a response, inclusive even from the president. That's in our capability. That's not theoretical. And that's where we're asking you to help us. There are many ways you can do that. Get in touch with the people who are the organizers you know of, the offices that you've been in touch with. If not, you can always write directly to the LaRouche Political Action Committee, and somebody will get to you because we're operating from the standpoint of taking action. And so on behalf of the LaRouche Political Action Committee, I want to thank everybody for being on tonight. I think we covered a lot of ground. And we have another call on Monday for those of you who would like to join us for that. And that should do it for tonight.
This session is no longer being recorded. Goodbye.